Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm bringing you guys a brand new catch-up review video where I get to talk about some projects released earlier this year that for whatever reason I didn't have a chance to talk about when they initially dropped, either because I was too busy or because maybe I didn't decide to check out the project until later because it got good reviews or something like that. But I will specify all that when I talk about each project individually as to why I decided to listen to them. But I'm not going to waste too much time here with this introduction. You know how it goes with these videos. Just talk about the albums. It's just my own personal opinion. If you happen to disagree, perfectly okay. This is just my own personal thoughts. So the first album we're going to be talking about here today is the newest album from Deafheaven entitled Ordinary Corrupt Human Love. This is a group that I've heard positive things about in the past, but I never checked them out until this project dropped because, I heard good things about it, and I was like, might as well check them out now when they have a new project that came out and see how I enjoy it. And good thing I did, because I did end up enjoying this a lot. In fact, this is probably one of my favorite projects of the year so far. This is pretty much a pretty fantastic album, in my opinion. I do want to specify I haven't listened to any of the band's previous material before this album. This is the only one I listened to. So I can't really compare it to their older works or anything quite like that, but on its own, I really enjoyed this album. If you've been following this album for any period of time, you might know, or you might be able to tell rather, that when it comes to black metal, I like the genre. I enjoy myself some black metal every now and again, but it's not one of my favorite subgenres in metal. And you could probably tell based on the amount of black metal I review here on the channel, which is not a lot. In Deafheaven here on this project, they take black metal elements and mix it with a bunch of other stuff that makes it, a bit more interesting to me. I guess you could say I do really love the animalistic wailing that appears on all the tracks here on this project. Just the intensity that these songs manage to bring, despite the fact that a lot of the instrumentals spread across this project are a lot more beautiful sounding than harsh or animalistic that you would the type of sound that you would expect associated with black metal. And I do really love a lot of the instrumentals on this project and just how beautiful that they could sound at times. I love the juxtaposition between the very harsh vocals and the very, more soothing, beautiful instrumentals, I guess you could say. I really love that dynamic. I know it's not exclusive to this album from this group, or that this is the first album to ever do anything like that, but I do just really enjoy that. Tracks like Honeycomb, Canary Yellow, and Worthless Animal are just songs that have some great guitar parts thrown in there as well. Just the guitar parts and instrumentals to these tracks just, I find, easily get stuck in my head, despite the fact that these songs are definitely not structured in a typical pop song structure or anything quite like that. Many of these songs go on for quite a bit of time, with the majority of songs on this thing being close to 10 minutes in length or so, but there's not a dull moment, really, on this thing, I would say. Pretty much every minute of this album that goes on for a little over an hour feels pretty justified overall, and these longer songs feel still very entertaining. There are some shorter cuts on this thing as well, and oftentimes these are a bit more I guess you could say, subdued compared to some of the longer, more intense cuts on this thing. But I felt like these were a nice, just a nice breath of fresh air, I guess you could say, compared to some of the other longer cuts on the album. They provided some breathing room on this thing, and they were much appreciated, at least for me. Overall, I felt like this was a pretty fantastic album through and through. It's definitely one that I could see myself coming back to listen to again later this year and in the upcoming years, because I do find myself really enjoying it. So yeah, I would have to highly recommend this album to you if you're a fan of metal music, if you're a fan of rock music, or if you just want some good music to listen to regardless of genre. This is one that you should definitely have on your radar, in my opinion. And I'm definitely going to be checking out the rest of this band's back catalog going forward, considering how much I enjoyed this project. Alright, the next project, or rather the next two projects that I'm going to be talking about, are the two newest EPs from Iglooghost, Clear Tamei and Steel Mogu. Now, I am going to, talk about both of these kind of at the same time, because, they're both from the same artist. They were both released at around the same time. So, they're kind of meant to be companion pieces in a sense. So I feel like to talk about them just isolated, like two completely separate things, wouldn't be right, I guess you could say. So I am going to talk about them kind of together, though I will make my opinions on each of these things pretty clear. Unfortunately, I do have some distinct opinions on each of these EPs, so it should be pretty clear what I think about each one by the end of this, or at least hopefully it should be. Now, Iglooghost is an electronic music producer that initially, when I heard about him, was back around in 2016, I would like to say, when he dropped the Chinese New Year EP of his. Back then, my taste in electronic music wasn't quite as deep as it is today, and even still today, it's not quite that deep. Again, if you follow this channel for any period of time, electronic music isn't covered all that frequently on here. Not that I dislike it, but I'm just not quite as knowledgeable in the genre as I am with other genres like metal or hip-hop. But still, when I heard that EP back in 2016, I believe it was, or 2015, one of those years it was released, I didn't really enjoy it all too much just because it wasn't really, something I could really connect to or understand at the time with the knowledge I had, I guess you could say. Though recently I decided to revisit it along with some of his other older works and found myself enjoying them quite a bit, given that my music taste has only grown weirder with time, I guess you could say. And when he dropped these two new EPs, eventually I did end up checking them out. As they dropped around the time I was kind of revisiting some of that older material, so I didn't really feel completely comfortable in reviewing these two things when they initially dropped, but I do feel comfortable talking about them now pretty much. And overall, I would say that these two EPs are enjoyable additions to Iglooghost's discography. I do prefer Clear Tamei to Steel Mogu, which does seem to be the popular, general consensus when it comes to these two EPs and people's opinions on them. But I do think both of them are good and worth checking out if you're a fan of Iglooghost. Clear Tamei has this more upbeat almost sound, I guess you could say. It sounds a bit more soothing at times. It's just a bit brighter, I guess, in terms of the tone. And I just found it to be a bit more interesting as far as the two projects go, pretty much. Steel Mogu, on the other hand, has a bit more of an aggressive sound to it, a bit darker of a feel, and I honestly would have found I feel like I would have, had you described these two EPs to me before I listened to them, I feel like I would have been more attracted to Steel Mogu, but that's not quite how it ended up playing out, which is I find kind of funny. Clear Tamei has some of my favorite tracks spread across these two EPs, most notably New Vectors, which I feel like is just a fantastic cut, probably my favorites across these two EPs together. And I also really like the closing track on this thing, Shrine Hacker, which has these very beautiful sounding female vocals added into the track as well. It's also a pretty, lengthy song, at least compared to a lot of the other tracks on these EPs, but it doesn't really, overstay its welcome, I guess you could say. It's interesting for the entirety of its run. Now, it's not a perfect EP by any means, Clear Tamei. There are some, moments on here that I feel like are a bit more forgettable in the grand scheme of things. I'm especially not a big fan of kind of the very short intro track on this thing, and the same goes for Steel Mogu because it also has a very short intro-like track. I feel like it could have just been tacked onto the beginning of the first song, or not be included at all, and it still would have worked just as fine, pretty much. They just kind of felt like filler to me to some extent, because they really weren't interesting enough to come back to, and they really weren't all that interesting in the context of the greater EPs as a whole either. Not that they weren't particularly bad, but they just didn't interest me all that much. When it comes to Steel Mogu, as I said before, it was a more aggressive project. It still has its good moments on it, but it just didn't interest me quite as much as Clear Tamei did. My favorite cut on this EP is probably the title track, which I do feel like is probably another one of my favorites spread across these two EPs. I feel like it does the more aggressive feel that this EP is going for the best out of any of the cuts on here. And, when it comes to the rest of the cuts on this EP, none of them are particularly bad, but some of them just feel kind of forgettable in the grand scheme of things. Like the track May Mode, for example, which just has a pretty underwhelming drop, in my opinion. Wasn't super interesting, felt a bit typical, which isn't really what I would expect from Iglooghost, given how, crazy and all over the place the music can be at times. A lot of the other cuts on this EP were fine enough, but didn't really surprise me or anything quite like that. They just felt like okay songs overall. So overall, I would say that these two EPs are pretty enjoyable if you're an Iglooghost fan. I wouldn't say that they're necessarily the best starting places for his music, but they are fun, enjoyable EPs. And as I said before, each EP does have its own sort of distinct sound to it. Not that they sound like, night and day or anything quite like that. They do still sound like the same artist, but they sound like the same artist trying two slightly different things, pretty much. And I just feel like one of them ends up sounding stronger than the other. So yeah, I think Clear Tamei is a pretty great EP overall. There are some moments on it that I feel like are maybe a little bit less interesting than others. Some, maybe a cut or two that wasn't quite as interesting. But Steel Mogu was an EP that was just kind of decent in my opinion. I really like the title track on that one, but the rest, I just don't really feel like I'll be coming back to in the future like I might with Clear Tamei. But these two EPs are also kind of, companion pieces to some extent. So if you're going to listen to them, listening to them together is somewhat interesting, seeing these two styles kind of play out side by side. It's just a kind of interesting project overall, having these two EPs that are slightly different sounding but meant to kind of go together. But yeah, Clear Tamei I would highly recommend. It's one of the better EPs I've heard this year. Definitely a pretty interesting project. Steel Mogu would also recommend you check it out because it's pretty decent overall, but it didn't really blow me away personally. But if you happen to like more aggressive music, maybe you will enjoy it more than Clear Tamei. But then again, I also thought I would be in that camp, but that's not quite how it worked out. So, I don't know. Just listen to the EPs yourself and come to your own conclusions, I guess, is all I'm going to say with that one. But overall, yeah, these were two EPs that I enjoyed overall. And with that said, that's all the projects we're going to be talking about here today in this catch-up review. I know this one was a bit shorter than some of my previous ones, but between my schedule recently and videos and other video stuff I've been working on, this one just ended up being a little bit shorter. But yeah, thank you guys for watching this review. Hope you guys find some good music in the form of these projects here that I recommended today. Would recommend you check them all out to at least some degree. And with that said, just my own personal opinion. Fine if you disagree, comment down below what your thoughts on these projects were. And while you're down there, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content. Thank you for watching, guys, and stay golden.